I need to create an air extraction box for my laser. The manufacturer behind my laser is absolutely amazing, but there's one small detail that's really been annoying me. I'll let you judge from this photo. This is my current setup and it really is not ideal. The tape leaves a huge messy residue behind, and because there's warm air coming out of this vent, it tends to fall off a lot. Time for a permanent solution made with the laser itself and the 3D printer. My laser has a built-in chiller. That keeps the laser tube nice and cool as it runs. The way the chiller works is a lot like the way a radiator works in a car. In a nutshell, it's a heat exchanger. It generates quite a bit of hot air. The hot air itself isn't the problem. The laser already has an air extraction system built in. The problem is that the chiller runs every 2 to 3 minutes while the laser's firing. Because the chiller fan's so powerful, it draws vacuum from the laser enclosure. That means that some fumes are actually pulled into my office workspace, which isn't great. So now to design the solution. So let's start with the things that we know. First I'll design a plate to go over the fan outlet at the back of the laser. The biggest I can go is 230mm tall by 250mm wide. I also know that the fan diameter is 200mm. The fan shroud sticks out a bit, so I'll need to add some clearance for the mounting screw holes. Thanks to Corel, vector editing is super simple. It takes me less than 10 minutes to come out with a design which fits snugly over the radiator fan. Up to this point we've been thinking in 2D, now it's time to jump to 3D thinking. So now it's time to design the airbox. We know that the plywood's 7mm thick. With that in mind, we can design the finger slots which will form the box. Even though it's a bit of extra work, I'm going with a 10mm slot size. Come on, you gotta love the metric system. Now to make a 10mm grid pattern. This will make it super simple to cut out those fingers. So how's this all going to attach to my laser? Luckily for me, the case of my laser is made out of steel. I found some 14mm neodymium magnets on eBay. Now I just have to make some suitable mounting holes for the magnets. Now to make some decisions on where 10 of those neodymium magnets are going to go. I'm really excited that this won't have to be permanently attached to the laser. Now we have to form the slot outline that's going to make this box. It's not too much work, so I'm going to make this manually, so you'll see how that's done. If you want to do the same but not as much work, you can always use MakerCase. By sheer luck and no forethought, the size of this box turned out perfectly. The offset of one side being 230mm and the other being 250 makes this design fit really well. And that's the mounting face completed. Technically I didn't have to do this next part, but I took out some extra nodes just to make sure they weren't in the design. This part is ready to cut, but we still need some more. I duplicated the design that I've already created because the front and back faces of the box are going to be identical. Not completely identical, but you get the idea. The outer side of the airbox is going to have a 3D printed flange. The flange size is predetermined by the air extraction hose that we're using. In this case 150mm or 6 inches. Now we just need to establish the PCD or pitch circle diameter of the bolt pattern. I'll be using 12 M5 fasteners for this design. So that the bolts clear the outside of the flange, we need to make that PCD a bit bigger at 165mm. Corel makes this really easy using the polygon tool. I just pick 12 sides and lay that out inside a circle, and now I know exactly where my mounting holes need to be. I'll slightly oversize the mounting holes so that they have clearance for the bolts. Rinse and repeat times 12. Alright, we're getting closer to the goal. We now have the inner and outer faces of the airbox. The mounting flanges look awesome. Next I'll need to form up the four sides of the box to enclose it. Here's a trick that I learned in graphic design in high school. Because we've already got the design, we can project outwards from that to create additional designs with similar features. Remember that with this design it isn't a square, it's a rectangle, so we have one side longer than the other. It's a bit of extra work, but that's okay, I don't mind. I've got to step back for a second and remember that we're working in 3 dimensions now, and that these sides are going to slot into each other. So with that in mind, one side's going to have a different mounting face than the other anyway. Here's the bit where I realised I walked into a trap. Yep, nobody to blame but myself on this one. Originally my design had 70mm for the depth of the sides of the box. I forgot to count for the thickness of the plywood that I was forming it out of, so now I'm having to add an extra 7mm to each face of the box. And that's one side finished. Looking good. Rinse and repeat, we've got to do the other side now. The good news now though is that this is the design phase of the box almost finished. Now the laser box design is done. I can virtually overlay the parts to make sure that I've got all of the slots right. We can move over to the laser, my favourite bit. Watching a laser cut never gets old. It's kind of what got me into this in the first place. It's kind of mesmerising to watch. Not long into this cutting, I remembered just how bad the room gets when I don't have that extractor on. It really does stink, and it's not ideal to be breathing this all the time. I didn't want to put it back on because I'd spent a lot of time cleaning the tape residue off the back of the machine. Luckily this cutting didn't take too long, so I just put up with it temporarily. A little bit of this is sneaky editing. In real life, I cut this bit first. I just wanted to make sure it all fit before I went any further with the design. It fit like an absolute glove, and I knew that I was on the right track for this project. The chiller's constantly cycling water around the laser tube to keep it cool. My machine runs a glass laser tube. It's really important to make sure that they stay cool, otherwise the glass tube can crack, and they're not cheap to replace. Even though this fan runs only when required, I still have a 6-inch or 150mm diameter fan in the window that runs at all times. That keeps all the odour in my filter, which sits outside of the window. I'll show that in another video. Now we've cut all the plywood on the laser, 10 magnets, 10 holes, what could possibly go wrong? Oh, what? Broke one. Gotta be kidding me. Well, that'll teach me. I knew that neodymium magnets are strong and that they can shatter, but I still went and did it. I'll replace this one later. Can't believe that. My next problem to solve is that the magnets are thinner than the plywood. Epoxy also makes a huge mess, and I didn't want that leaking out on the bench as I glued them. My dollar store fix is some hot melt glue. The hot melt glue did the trick. Did a perfect job. A small bead applied to the outside of the magnets held them perfectly in place in their slots. This side's the mounting face, so I'm trying to get the magnets as flush as I possibly can. Permanently fixing the magnets to the plywood isn't a huge deal. Here I'm mixing up some 2-part epoxy for just that job. The epoxy I'm using is only $2 a pack, and this was the last of what I had left in the tubes, so I didn't mind mixing the whole lot up to make sure I had more than not enough and having to do more again later. So here's my maker hack of the year. The plastic lids they put on the top of baby formula tins are absolutely magic for mixing epoxy. Earbuds, cotton tips, Q-tips, whatever you call them, they're really good for working with epoxy. I use them in much the same way that people use those twirly things with honey. Just give it a twist and the gravity keeps it on there. When you stop, it lets go. This epoxy usually only takes a couple of hours to dry, but I let this one go overnight just to make sure. I didn't want to do this a second time. So now it's time to flip it over and get rid of that hot melt glue. It took way more effort to get rid of it than I thought. Now for my favourite part of these builds, gluing up the boxes. There's something about making boxes that I just really love. Normal PVA glue works really good on most types of timber. At this point I'm just using it for the assembly. I'm only going to glue up half of the box though, because we have some other things we're going to do. PVA glue takes a little while to dry. The flange mount plate can go on to make sure that the box is true while it's gluing. This ensures that the box isn't wonky for final assembly. The quick clamps will hold it in place for an hour or two while everything dries up. Oh yeah, remember that flange I've been banging on about that's going to be 3D printed? I should probably get to designing that. Now we need to copy the PCD from the flange mount on the plywood. So one more time, 12-sided polygon, M5 mounts, you know the deal. Should by now. So now's the time to start talking about my nuts. Wait, no. Backtrack a bit. I mean captive nuts. You know what captive nuts are, right? Captive nuts are designed into the part so that we don't have to worry about holding a spanner on the other side when we do these hex bolts up. I'm not making a thread, we're actually going to insert the nuts into the 3D printed plastic part. I can hear what you're thinking. You're saying, man, that's a lot of work just to make this thing. 3D printing is so rewarding, and it feels so good to have that item in your hand once you've finished working on it. Let's get 3D printing now. It's time to print this flange. "20 hours of printing, 110 meters of filament, that's a third of a roll. Stuff gets crazy sometimes. Captive nut slots were the only part that supports were printed in, so these need to be removed before we can go any further. The manufacturing process is complete. Now it's time to start assembly. Now with all of the M5 nuts inserted into the flange assembly, it can be bolted onto the box, and we're almost there. If you can see light through the bolt holes, that means you're probably on the right track. The sizings all come out perfectly between the 3D printer and the laser. If your machinery is calibrated right, it'll never be a surprise. There might be some small tolerances here and there that you need to play with to get things just right. We got things just right, so now it's time to bolt that flange into the box. It's the first time I've done this kind of construction before, and the fitment here is so perfect that this doesn't even need to be sealed. And that's really good because if I ever decide I want to change this flange in the future, I won't have to remake the entire box. So let's clip these two halves together and see how it's going to look. And in case you're wondering how strong the neodymium magnets are, this is trying to stick to my steel bench through 1/2 inch or 12.5mm MDF and a microfiber cloth. Did someone say satisfying moment? Oh yeah. Alright, time to seal this puppy up. I'm a massive fan of the Selleys 3-in-1. It sticks, seals and fills. Perfect for what we need. So I'm going to put it out there that my sealing job here doesn't look fantastic, but I did do the finger wipe of shame at the end and smoothed everything down, and it does look okay at the end, so don't judge me just yet. Silicone sealing is a messy sport. So it's time to seal this patient up. We'll glue it together first with some PVA glue, but I'll finish this later with some Selleys 3-in-1 to really seal everything together nicely. That's also why we've done this in 2 halves, and you'll understand when you see it. Ooh, that's a nice fit. Now we can put the clamps on and let it dry overnight. Alright, we've got this together now. A little bit more sealing to go, and the wipe of shame like I said, and we're on the right track to finishing this project. Since the very start of this video began, this has only ever been a mental image in my brain. I didn't put pen to paper or make any sketches or designs before I even started. You've now watched as I've designed it straight from my brain to the screen to a physical object, and I think that's really cool. So we're pretty much finished, and it's time to hook this puppy up and start using it. In case you were wondering, 9 magnets is still enough to hold this on solid as a rock. There's no way this is coming off on its own. And just like that, everything's back to normal again. No sticky messy tape on the back of the machine, no smells in my office. Perfect. Thanks again for watching the video. If you've made it this far, I really hope I've earned your subscription and maybe a like or a comment. YouTube is a nothing without an audience, so thank you for being there. I'll catch you on the next video. Got some cool stuff coming up.